Hello and welcome to World Talks, where every word matters. I'm your host, Sasha Farbach. Now, as Russian drones crash on Moldovan territory and the war in neighboring Ukraine rages on, Moldova remains steadfast in its European aspirations. Small European nation, historically caught between East and West, faces mounting security challenges while pushing forward on its path toward EU integration. Now, with uncertainty looming and pressure growing, how does Moldova stay on course toward its European future? Now, joining me now in the studio is Cristina Gherasimov, Moldova's Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for European Integration, to discuss the country's determination. Thank you so much for joining us here in the studio.
Thank you for inviting.
I want to start with hybrid warfare. I mean, this is a term that your country knows full well. Recently, again, in the last days, there have been more Russian drones that have crashed on your territory. What is that position now, that hybrid war is still real for you? How is your country tackling that?
It's nothing new for Moldova, but definitely intensity has changed. We've seen drones falling on Moldovan territory more often these days. Fortunately, no casualties, no victims. But I have to say that luck is not a substitute for air defense. In our case, we are investing as much as we can in strengthening our security, our defense sector, but we know that for regional stability, we need first and foremost to have a strong Ukraine.
Mm-hmm. And all that subject Ukraine we'll get in a moment, but also from a European Union perspective. I know that you're meeting here with European ministers over the next couple of days here. I believe, will hybrid threats be a topic of those discussions?
Indeed, we're discussing hybrid tactics, Russia's hybrid tactics on EU member states and candidate countries alike, to find common solutions for how we can fight it back.
Mm-hmm. And also now looking at the European road, I mean, your country has done a lot, stepped forward as a candidate now, potentially that timeline looking at 2030 as a member state. But what about the concept right now? The European Union has its hands full. Is Moldova on track, or do you sense that it might be caught in this limbo as the European Union might get stuck with enlargement and other more pressing issues?
There are indeed pressing issues on the European agenda, and on our side what we can do is to move on with things that depend on us. So we are fully focused on advancing on our negotiations agenda with Brussels. We still see the same openness on behalf of EU member states, on behalf of EU institutions, in terms of moving to the next steps in the negotiation process. At the same time, of course, there are pressing security issues that need to be solved for the enlargement agenda to move forward as well.
Mm-hmm. Now, recently at the Munich Security Conference, you had Vice President J.D. Vance in quite a statement addressing not just the conference but the world, saying the greatest threat to Europe he sees is not Russia, it's not China, it's threats from within. How does that resonate for your country? I mean, that is a statement to make. Do you feel that the United States is letting your region down, letting Europe down on that?
Every country has its own vulnerabilities. Moldova is no exception to that. However, these vulnerabilities are being exploited by external forces. Should there be no exploitation by Kremlin, by Russia, of things that we are still struggling with as a result of decades of democratic transitions, we would have been in a very different situation today. Disinformation is, of course, finding fertile ground in countries like Moldova, where we still have a large population speaking predominantly the Russian language. Yet this is, we see an unprecedented attack coming from Russia in order to exploit the specificity of Moldova. That doesn't mean that we wouldn't have had these problems without Russian interference, but it would have been definitely a very different caliber that we as a government, as a country, would have been able to deal much better with.
Mm-hmm. I mean, your country is still contending, as you said, with disinformation from Russia, still with that impact to your detriment, we should say that. The European Union has stepped in to try and help. But do you think of the last few days, of the kind of messaging that's coming from Washington, messaging that's coming from Trump, Does that embolden Russia to do more in Moldova, potentially harmfully to your nation?
I think it's something we will see in the next few days and weeks, but it definitely also emboldens local political actors to be more vocal on subjects that would have not been brought into public discussion otherwise.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so a kind of a point to also react, to defend against such attacks as well.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. So also looking at your neighbor Ukraine, I know that in the past we've discussed this a little bit about how very much linked the cause in Ukraine is also to Moldova and that journey into Europe. How does that now change, again, because of the comments coming out of Washington? Ukraine now in a very difficult situation. How does that affect Moldova?
Anything that affects Ukraine directly affects Moldova as well. We are part of the same region. We share a very long border with Ukraine. Anything that impacts the security of Ukraine impacts also the security of Moldova. All of the discussions for the next weeks and months ahead of us on reaching a peace deal for Ukraine has to be done with Ukraine's participation, with the European Union member states' participation, so that we reach a just peace deal that is a sustainable solution for the overall European security architecture in the future.
Mm-hmm. And I suppose then if we look at the alternative of Trump does a deal with Putin without the European Union, which European allies are concerned, how would that also impact? Would that again embolden Putin and the Kremlin to do more step-up, ramp-up hybrid attacks? We know that there's potentially also Russian troops still in Transnistria. How is that a security concern for your nation?
It's a big security concern, having discussions about Ukraine, without having the European Union at the table. Moldova is a very small country. It's still a fragile democracy, though a very ambitious one that sees itself, its future in the European Union. However, the security situation in the region, should it deteriorate because of a decision on behalf of Ukraine, without having Ukraine on the table, that directly affects our security as well.
Mm-hmm. And also, if we look at the region, I mean, Poland has stepped in very much under Donald Tusk, the Prime Minister. I think visits also to Chisinau as well. How has the role between Poland and Moldova developed over these last months, and how do you view that relationship in the future?
We have an excellent relation with Warsaw, also particularly under these 6 months of the Polish EU presidency. We have discussed multiple times our priorities for these months, and we very much are grateful and lucky to have Warsaw as a strategic partner of Moldova in full solidarity with developments at home, be it of political nature or of economic nature. We've managed to do a lot only in the last couple of weeks to secure Moldova's energy independence, part of, let's say, the Polish presidency in Brussels. So the discussions about Moldova's security have been given priority despite the very unusual and difficult geopolitical circumstances that we all live.
Mm-hmm. So a strong ally in the region. At the same time, if we're talking about security, that also includes energy security. I mean, what we've also been observing in terms of energy in Moldova, with gas, with the problems with Russia, Transnistria, the flow there. How is that being tackled right now, and what's the future of energy security for Moldova?
At the beginning of January, we were confronted with an artificial energy crisis created by Kremlin with the refusal of Gazprom to deliver Russian gas to the Transnistrian region, which for decades has been delivered as free Russian gas. That has come along without a proper notice so that we would be able to prepare in advance. From an electricity standpoint of view, the right bank is still very much vulnerable because our electricity infrastructure still goes via the Transnistrian region. So we are not fully independent from the infrastructure, the electricity infrastructure that passes by the Transnistrian region. However, we have made very clear steps together with the European Commission, with the EU member states, to put together a 2-year plan that will be defined in the weeks and months ahead of us, where we will prioritize strategic investments in energy infrastructure, strengthening the share of renewables in our total energy mix, so that in the near future we become fully independent of Russia's blackmail. 2 years ago, we managed in record time to set up an energy market in Moldova when for decades we were used to buy gas only from Gazprom. And I'm very confident that by the end of this year we will manage to also fully decouple from the electricity dependence that we still have on Russia.
Mm-hmm. Well, we saw encouraging signs as well. I mean, it's a different system, but with the Baltic states as well doing that just some days ago, also connecting to Europe. So something similar in a different light, but freedom for Moldova in that way. Yeah.
And in a record time, really, because we have not really done much to secure our energy independence for decades. It has been only throughout the last 5 years that we've really managed to move with the speed of light in terms of setting the infrastructure, setting the connections, setting a market mechanism that would allow us to really detach ourselves from the dependence on Russia.
Mm-hmm. So it's a tough battle, but it shows again, as you're saying, as to hear now, that Moldova is doing very much to join Europe, to continue to be a European partner. Thank you so much, Minister, for coming in and joining us today.
Thank you for inviting.
And thank you for joining us. That's all for this World Talks, but stay tuned, much more coming up right here on TVP World. Goodbye.